Everyone. Okay, so in this video, we're actually going to look at the Maya interface and sort of give you a little bit of a tour of what's happening here. And this is very much a kind of surface level introduction. We're going to get a little bit more in a lot of my subsequent videos here into the individual tools and all of their functions. So this is more just an overview of kind of everything that you're seeing on the screen and all the different regions of the screen. And, you know, to start off with, before we even get to that, the thing to remember is that Maya is a very big program. Big meaning that it serves many different people in many different ways. So, for example, you know, if you work in some kind of a movie production pipeline, there will be hundreds of people working in Maya, and they might all be working in different parts of the program. So one thing to kind of keep in mind here is that, you know, the stuff that we're going to be looking at here is not only surface level, but it's probably only one part of a very, very big program. So this program has been around for a while now, and it's part of many different industry, as they say, workflows. So keep that in mind as we're kind of going through this stuff here. But all the sort of functionality that we're talking about here is very much fundamental. So it's something that you need to know pretty much no matter what. Okay, so the first thing that you want to look at is that when you open up Maya, your screen may not look exactly like mine. Or if you come into the lab at some point and someone else has been working in Maya, you may notice that the screen looks a little bit different than this. So how do you get the screen back to normal? So the first thing that you want to look at is right up here in the upper right hand corner of the screen. There's a little tab that says Workspace, and this tells you what part of the screen that you're going to be, what type of screen configuration that you're working in. So in other words, this screen is very customizable, and these are sort of the presets for different workflows, and this is called Modeling Standard right now. Now, the one that you're probably going to use is going to be Maya Classic. This will load up by default in Maya, and that's going to look a little bit more like this. Actually, it's not going to look like that. Let's just go back to Modeling Standard here, because this is going to be pretty much the way that yours is going to look. But my guess is when you come into the labs, yours will be set to Maya Classic. I've done a little bit of reconfiguring of mine, but you can see that if we go into different configurations here, you can see that this little shelf up here changes. You can see that if we, you know, that drastically changes depending on which layout we've got. And so, in other words, that should clue you in as to just how big this program is. Now, I'm not saying that in any way to intimidate you. In fact, one goal of this little walkthrough here is to sort of let you know that, like, Maya actually isn't that scary. It's just a big program, and you know, if you kind of stay within the lines of the way that we are going to be working in this semester, you'll be pretty comfortable with it pretty quickly. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about other ways that the screen can be customized. So you have your workspace, but then you've also got different menu sets right up here. Now, if you look on so this is on the left-hand side of the screen. So on the right end of the screen, there's different workspaces. On the left-hand side of the screen, there are what are called different menu sets. And what that means is that you can see we've got menus at the top of the screen, these pull-down menus here. And if we change this little toggle box here, from, say, modeling, which is here by default, to, say, rigging, you'll notice that these menus change. And if we change that to animation, they change again, FX, and so on. So the one that we're going to be working in almost entirely this semester is modeling. So if anything's looking a little weird, just make sure that your menu set says modeling and that your workspace is set to Maya Classic, and you should be just fine. Okay, so those are the menu sets. And the other thing about the menus here is, and another reason why you shouldn't be too intimidated, because without a doubt, if you're looking at these pull-down menus here, you're thinking, oh my God, there are tons of functions in these little pull-down menus here. And there are, and though they also change, right? So there's even more functions. But the reason you shouldn't be too intimidated by this is that most of the functions here can also be found elsewhere in the interface. So in other words, all these shelf buttons here also correspond to one of the pull-down menus. So these are just faster ways to get to the same functions that you'll find in a lot of the pull-down menus. So don't be too worried about this. And keep in mind that, once you get the hang of what these pull down menus are for, it'll be easier to kind of think about them. So don't worry too much about that. So let's talk about these shelves here too. So you'll notice that we've got a bunch of these what are known as shelves at the top of the screen here, and they each represent a different type of workflow. And the good news is that for our purposes this semester, we are pretty much going to be confining everything that we do to this shelf that says poly modeling. And we'll be getting to know all of the buttons on this shelf pretty well, with the exception of maybe a couple of them that we don't really need. And basically what we've got here are some primitive pieces of geometry on the left here. So we've got like a sphere, and you can see that we can create a sphere or a box or a cylinder just by pressing these buttons. And you'll also see that if we were to go to, say, the Create menu at the top of the screen and pull down to Polygon Primitives, you can see that those same buttons are present in the pull down menu as well. So sphere, cube, cylinder. And you'll also notice that there are some ones that are present in the pull down menu that are not on the shelf, like helix. So oftentimes what you'll find is that the shelf is a quick path to the most used things, and the pull down menus are the sort of deeper dive. And so same thing can be found here, right? So, all right, there we go. And we'll talk a little bit about what poly modeling is in the coming videos here. But just so you know, it's a little bit confusing because you might see this menu here that says curved surfaces or curves/surfaces. And you'll notice that a lot of these same primitives exist, but these are different, right? We are not going to be learning about this shelf very much. We might use some of the line drawing tools here, but these are different, and we will not be using this. This is what is known as NURBS modeling, and we're going to be just confining ourselves to poly modeling. And poly modeling is the sort of more modern workflow here, and not as many people use this anymore. So think poly modeling when you think modeling, and think the orange buttons, not the blue buttons. Okay, and again, yeah, we're not going to be messing around with a lot of these other shelves here. So as far as the other stuff is concerned, on the top of the screen here, we've got some file functions like undo, redo, save, and so on. And then we've got some snapping functions, which we'll talk a little bit about in the future. And then we've got some rendering buttons here, which we'll talk about also in the future. But for now, you can kind of ignore these for the moment, and just kind of, the shelf is really where we're going to be spending a lot of our time here. Now, before we get too far along here, let's talk about the main window. This is the viewport, right? And we should have really started with this window, because this is the most important window in the screen. That's part of the reason why it's the biggest. This is where everything happens. This is where we're actually going to visualize things, right? So let's get some objects in here. So I'm just going to create a cube, and I'll just scale this up a little bit so that we've got something bigger to look at. Okay, so this is a 3D viewport, right? And you may have worked in 3D environments before, whether it was a video game or whether it was another 3D program like Cinema 4D or Houdini or Modo or whatever. You're always going to be kind of dealing with a viewport like this. And what this viewport is you're trying to navigate a three-dimensional space on a 2D screen. So our screen is flat. This is a sort of fictitious 3D space, right? And we've got to figure out how to move around it. So there's three main functions when you're trying to navigate this 3D space. And to navigate, you need to use a keystroke command plus your mouse. So the first navigate we're going to learn is called tumbling. And the most important thing that you can remember about navigating here is the keyboard command, the Alt key, or on a Mac it would be the Command key. Whichever computer you're using, it's the button that is directly to the left of the space bar on the keyboard. And if you hold down that button and then hold down your left mouse button and click and drag, you can orbit or tumble around your object. Okay, so that's called tumbling. And that's basically just rotating around an object. Now, the second function that we're going to learn is called panning. And a lot of people overlook this on the first day, and once they realize that it exists, they're very happy that it exists. So don't forget about this one, but this is also holding down the Alt key and then holding down the middle mouse button And on a Mac or in the Macs in the lab, if you've got that Mac mouse that has that little tiny wheel, you actually click down right onto the wheel. So you just press down on the wheel. Or if you have a mouse that has a dedicated middle mouse button, which I prefer, that's what you use, right? So it's Alt, middle mouse click, and then you kind of go side to side or up and down like this. So this is panning, right? As opposed to tumbling, which is the left, Alt left. So this is Alt left or Command left mouse, and this is Alt or Command middle mouse. Now, and if you're on a Mac, the third function that you're going to learn is just using the scroll wheel to zoom in and out. If you're on a PC, you can actually Alt and then right click to zoom in and out. So this is zooming, and that's just using the scroll wheel or Alt right click on a PC. And then again, panning, Alt or Command middle mouse, and then tumbling, Alt or Command left mouse. Now, if you get those three commands down, you use them together to just sort of size up your object, and it's pretty handy. Now, there's one other really useful function for navigating the viewport. And so let's say, for example, I've got a sphere, and the sphere is way out here. One thing that you'll notice is that if I tumble around my scene, or let's say I want to tumble and I want to zoom in on that sphere, but it's really hard, right? Because if I go way out here, my viewport is still trying to tumble around the middle of the scene, and it's very hard to get a kind of grasp on this thing. Even if I click on it, nothing useful is happening. So what you have to do in Maya is you have to tell Maya, okay, I want you to focus on this object. I want you to tumble around this, or I want you to zoom in on this. And to do that, you simply press the F key. And what that'll do is I just press the F key, and that automatically zooms in on that object, and then it will allow you to tumble around that and zoom in around that. And so the F key is probably one of the more useful functions. So if I want to zoom in on the box over here, I can just click on it once, just left click on the box, and then press F. Okay, so that's pretty handy. All right, so let's delete these guys. And actually, I shouldn't have done that. Let me undo that. That's just Command Z. And let's bring this guy back in a little bit. So the other thing that we're going to show you, and then I'll stop this video and we'll start another one and continue our interface tour, is that this is not the only viewport, right? So this is actually one view, and you can see down here at the bottom, this is the perspective view, right? And what that means is that this is a three-dimensional view. Now, but in Maya, there are other ways to look at something other than just this traditional three-dimensional view. There's flat views of objects. So like say you just wanted to look at the top of things, or the side of things, or the front of things. You can break down into other views. To do that, you want to click on one of these buttons over here on the left-hand side of the screen. So right now we are in single view mode right here. And if we click on this button, nothing happens. But if we click on the button below that, it will automatically break Maya into 4 different views. So this is 4 views, or the quad view as some people call it. And you can see that down underneath each one of these views, there is a label. This says top. This says front. This says side. And so right now they kind of look like the same thing, but if we were to bring in an object, let's just bring in a cylinder, where the difference between the front and the side is a little bit different. So you can see here now we're looking at the top of the cylinder, here we're looking at the front, and here we're looking at the side of the cylinder. And wherever your mouse is hovered over, that's where your viewport navigation is going to work. Now you'll notice I can't tumble in these views, and they say orthographic views are currently locked. And what that means is that, this is a flat view. It does not have 3-dimensional space. We can only see this in 2 dimensions, right? This is just length and width, right? This is not height. And so same thing in the front view here, right? This is just the side of the object. We can't see the top. And that will benefit you when you're trying to work on this to actually make a model. But for now, it's just this is the 4 views, this is the 1 view, and then you can also do what's called a split view by clicking on the button below this. And the split view is just 2 views side by side. There's 4 views, there's 1 view, right? Now, the cool thing about Maya is that there are faster ways to get back and forth between some things than just clicking on buttons. So in this case, if I have my my mouse hovered over the viewport and I just simply hit the space bar, it's going to take me back to the 4 views. And then if I want to get quickly to this view, I can just hover my mouse over this view and then tap the space bar one more time. So space bar will take you, kind of zoomed in, zoomed out. That's sort of the way I like to think about it, right? So just something like that. And so that's pretty handy. And then again, F key to zoom in, right? Alt left to tumble, Alt middle mouse to pan, Alt right click to zoom. Okay, we're going to stop this video here and then continue in the next round where we'll talk about the rest of the stuff on the screen.